Hello, I'm Charles Coves, Australasia's passion provocateur. Welcome to this week's episode of the Charles Coves Show, whether you're watching on Rumble or on YouTube or listening via one of the many podcast platforms. It's great to have you here. I'll discuss 2 or 3 current local or global issues each week and then share some ideas on how the self-awareness and passion principles help you to effectively and elegantly handle these issues in the context of your life. I share resources whenever I think they're going to be helpful to you in the context of the topics I'm discussing. The show notes give you links to the foundational principles of the show and details about my background, and also give you links to our 2 websites, charlescoves.com and coves.com, where you can find out about our public programs, our one-on-one executive coaching, which is a self-awareness and passion program, and lots of wonderful free resources. You will also find details of my books, Passionate People Produce and Passionate Performance, at both of those websites. So let's go with today's big impact issues. And the big impact issue is the election of Donald Trump as president and how that impacts on us in many ways. Tipping points are big deals in the context of humanity and its progress. To give you an example of a tipping point, I consider the fall of the Berlin Wall to be a tipping point. I consider the end of Nicolae Ceausescu's reign as president of Romania in 1989 a tipping point. Tipping points can happen through black swan events, through unexpected situations. When you look back at the start of World War I, the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand in Serbia didn't immediately lead to World War I, but some 3 months later, it is used as the excuse for the commencement of World War I. And of course, the commencement of World War I was a tipping point, as was the commencement of World War II. A tipping point is also the actions of the Hungarian government in October 1989, where it decided on the 23rd of October to open its borders to Austria. Hungary was behind the Iron Curtain. Austria was in the west, free of the strictures of the Soviet Union. Hungary's decision to open its border then became a tipping point that led to the fall of the Berlin Wall on the 4th of November 1989, because many thousands of East Germans started driving through Hungary to escape to the west through the open borders that Hungary established with Austria. And that was an entirely unintended, the fall of the Berlin Wall was an entirely unintended consequence or unexpected consequence of that opening of the border. So the opening of the border was a tipping point. Tipping points change the trajectory of humanity either positively or negatively. Lenin coming to power in 2017 was a tipping point. Negative, I say. Stalin coming to power in the late 1920s was a tipping point. Hitler winning election in 1933 was a tipping point. The atomic bomb being dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki was a tipping point that led to the apparent ending of World War II, although these days, who knows what can be relied upon in terms of history. But these tipping points are major impacts in our lives. The assassination of JFK by the CIA, not by a lone gunman, but by the CIA, and hopefully with the election of Donald Trump, the truth around the JFK assassination will be revealed. Jerome Corsi co-authored a book released just this year, proving that JFK was assassinated by 2 shots to his front. Nothing to do with a lone gunman, Lee Harvey Oswald. That was a tipping point in 1963. JFK wanted to cause change. Prior to the election in the US on the 5th of November this year, I did not consider that the election would be a tipping point. It is now my view, and I hereby declare the election of Donald Trump again as president to be a tipping point, a positive tipping point for the future of humanity. It will change the trajectory of humanity, and it will change it in a number of big ways. And the question for you is, what are you going to do about this change of trajectory? Because you can approach it, in numerous ways in the context of your life. Interestingly, Donald Trump's surname gives us a clue that it's a tipping point, because TP, tipping point, is also the first and last letters of his surname. Do you like that? I like it. So let me tell you my thoughts on key elements of why Trump's election I now call a tipping point, but I wasn't calling it as a potential tipping point. They're always important, the elections, but this is a crucial tipping point for so many big reasons. And in the COVID scam that we've gone through from March 2020, when I started this show, regular viewers and listeners will know that I called the COVID response and the whole COVID game as a scam right from the start. I knew what governments were doing was not justified by the so-called threat of COVID, of a virus. So here's what's going to happen as a consequence of this election of Donald Trump. In no particular order. Firstly, it will slow down the transgender game. I have 2 daughters. I think it's outrageous that men want to call themselves women, go into women's change rooms and compete against women. And I think the reason why the transgender community gets away with this is because most people are kind. In my experience, most people are kind. Most people are not assholes. Most people are not psychopaths. When someone says, I want to identify as a cat, I'm a man, I want to identify as a woman. In fact, you don't get so many of those. I'm a woman. Sorry, I'm a man, I want to identify as a woman. We go, okay, if that's what you want to do. And then, because we don't call them out and say, no, you can't do that. You can dress like that, but we are going to treat you for all intents and purposes as a man, particularly in relation to sport and change rooms and security of women. We are far too kind. We don't speak the truth about that. The truth is there are 2 genders, men and women. You can identify as whatever you like, but don't, as a man, go into a woman's change room. Don't compete against women. The second, the shutting of the borders, the US borders with Mexico, the child trafficking that is coming through that border, the 10 million illegal aliens, we'll call them, that have come through those borders, many of fighting age, is a total, is like just destroys America as a nation. 10 million voters, if you give votes to those people, makes a massive impact on the election. Giving America back its national borders and then a deportation exercise, I consider to be crucial. Now, some people say, well, these people who have come in are doing important jobs. Great. First of all, if you are a convicted criminal from the country in which you have come through illegally to America, you get deported. If you've got a good job, if you've got a certification that you have a good job, you've been a good worker, it's okay. They'll be the last people who get deported. There won't be a 10 million person deportation, but it sends a warning to anybody else coming right now, walking from South America up through Mexico to get into America. Take responsibility, because it's highly unlikely that you will be able to get into America. The third element is the law and order situation. The Democrats have defunded the police to a large degree on a series of lies. By the way, I get all my information from many, many sources. I do not rely on the mainstream media for my information. In economic terms, in the way nations function, I have said before that the economic status of a country depends, number one, on its electricity supply, and number two, on the quality of its law and order. The destruction of law and order by the defunding of police is causing massive dislocation in America, and that is not being properly reported in Australia. We in the mainstream media are gaslit by how bad it is for so many Americans in mainstream America. The refunding of police, of properly protecting enabling police to do their proper job is going to be a crucial element in giving people, Americans, back confidence in the law and order system. Number 4, the Trump election will lead to the proper investigation of the COVID scam. And I say, and I've been saying for 4.5 years, that the COVID scam is one of the greatest evils imposed on humanity ever. The number of people who have been killed by the COVID scam, by the bad, inappropriate treatment of unwell people, including the use of ventilators, the money paid to hospitals for defining something as a COVID death. There's a bonus paid for defining something as a COVID death. All of those corrupt, criminal actions will have a light shone on them. And what this is going to lead to, this is why it's going to be such a tipping point, that we as citizens must not trust government. We must hold government to account. There is no benefit in trusting government, in trusting any politician. And I'm with John Rappaport, one of the great sources of information. Do not trust politicians. Hold them to account. Demand transparency. And one of those elements of transparency that I demand is to eliminate the commercial in confidence rules whereby we, the citizens, cannot get access to contracts signed by government with companies that are making money from those contracts. I say we should be entitled to see those details, and if a company wants taxpayer money, then it should be willing, it needs to be willing, it must be willing to have us look at those contracts to make sure that there are no special deals going on. The COVID scam, the gift of the COVID scam, will be this massive change in trajectory, a tipping point where citizens don't believe anything government tells them unless they give us evidence. Number 5, the proposed appointment of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as the Secretary of Health and Human Services in America will lead to the dismantling of the big pharmaceutical scam imposed on the world in terms of health, on the fraudulent research results that are published. Pharmaceutical companies do some good. They do incredible amounts of evil. Number 6, Bobby Kennedy will work to improve the health of Americans, and that will have a ripple effect in terms of agriculture, in terms of the soil quality emergency that we have, the chemicalization of soils. I say we don't have a climate emergency. We have a soil pollution emergency. We have a fertilizer, chemicalization of soil problem. And your health is deeply, deeply impacted by the quality of the food that you put into your body. If that is chemicalized and plasticized, it is causing harm to your body. It is causing you difficulties in living your life. I think this is going to be a major, major tipping point in terms of health. And at the end of the day, what's more important to you, your health or your wealth? The 7th element of why this is such a tipping point, this election, is because the election of Trump will inspire freedom groups, and I'm involved in a number of them, freedom fighting groups, not to give up. Trump fought against incredible odds, the opposition of mainstream media, of the Democrats, of almost the whole of Hollywood, and big business who were aligned with the Democrats, wanting the Democrats to continue, because what this COVID scam did was do a massive transfer of wealth to the elites at the expense of middle and lower classes. Freedom groups such as the Aligned Council of Australia, of which I'm a part, now know that there is hope, that there is a man elected to the position of President of the United States who speaks truth. Now, not 100%, nothing is 100%, but who's speaking more truth. And now the truth comes out about the senility of Joe Biden, which you and I could see when we saw it. It wasn't a secret, but the mainstream media kept ignoring it. Okay? That's what happens. The truth always comes out. The truth, like the sun, always comes out. And the election of Donald Trump will inspire freedom groups to say, no, we're not going to trust government. We are going to fight for the truth. We are going to speak the truth. And then number 8 is the functioning of the law courts. That our law and order system requires, and I've covered this in earlier shows, the rule of law is crucial to a functioning society. I think there are forces, the global cabal wants to shake the foundations of society so that we call on this global cabal to create a global government. I don't want a one world government. And the election of Trump will give us courage to fight for proper application of law and fight against judges who are corrupted, who have been influenced by not the law, but by political forces. Tipping points, they are crucially important. And in the context of your life, I want you to think about what have been the tipping points in your life. One of mine has been to marry Julie. Another for Julie has been to marry me. Tipping points. Contemplate your life. Think about what have been the tipping points and look at those tipping points and compare them to what I'm saying here will be the impact of the Trump election. Your awareness around the value of these tipping points in your life journey will enable you to make better decisions into your future. The next element of how this tipping point applies to your life is to be inspired to speak the truth. When you see men dressed as women going into change rooms, don't put up with it. If you've got your kids at schools where they've got boys going into girls' change rooms, don't put up with it. Speak up. Demand accountability of the teachers. Have the courage. Be inspired by Donald Trump fighting for what he thinks is right. What do you think is right? What are you willing to fight for? And this idea of being nice to let the transgender game to then cause harm to your children and your grandchildren is a bad decision. That's not being kind. That you're throwing away the truth to just be nice. Just to be kind. It's a bad strategy. So each one of us who speaks the truth makes a difference. And when you look back at the 4.5 years of the COVID scam, of the lies we've been told, we are now being told by Robert Redfield, the former head of the CDC in America, let's find out whether the virus was released from a Wuhan lab. I agree with the commentators who say that's an irrelevant question. That's not what the important question is. That's a distraction. The real question is the outrageous behaviour of politicians that I covered in episode 216 of my show. Lastly, be willing to be comprehensively informed, as Buckminster Fuller said. Do not get your information from one source. Get it from many sources. I hope I remain one of your sources of information, but Be inspired to talk to your friends to say, what do you think are great sources of information? I recommend John Rappaport as a great source of information. His Substack is wonderful. There are many Substacks. I don't want to go through them now because this is getting too long. Be consistent in getting reliable, useful information, including reliable, useful information on one of the great scams that is causing great harm in Australia is the massive amount of money being spent on renewable energy, allegedly because there's a climate emergency. There is no climate emergency. I reject the whole model of removing coal-generated electricity. We need base load electricity. The harm that's being done through this renewables energy game, I abhor it and I reject it, and we are being told a lie. Come on, people, it's time to speak the truth. Our job is to speak up. If we don't speak up, the politicians will keep doing what they want to do. And that's where your self-awareness comes in. Is that the sort of future you want to leave in your country for your grandchildren? It's not what I want to leave. So I hope today's show makes a beneficial difference in your life that inspires you to consider tipping points in your life and how important they are. Looking back in hindsight, what you thought. I didn't think the election was going to be a tipping point. I now see that it is a tipping point. And your awareness of the journey that you've been on in your life will give you a deeper appreciation of what you have gone through and, more importantly, of what you can create into the future. If you're new to the show, check the foundational principles and my background in the show notes, and also my websites charlescoves.com and coves.com. Again, thanks for watching or listening. And until our next show, may your week be full of challenges, of inspiration, of nurture, of fun, of ever-increasing self-awareness about what a magnificent life is to you and what you need to do to achieve it. Have a great week. See you next week. Bye.